Hey everyone, I'm Smruti Patel. I lead all things engineering, security, and data here at Apollo. And it's getting to be a packed room, so I gotta be honest with you all. If you're here hoping to hear about whether AI is coming for your jobs or not, I'm sorry, this is not it. For that, find me at drinks later today, and we can hash it out. But what we are here to talk about is why has it been so challenging to move agentic projects from pilots to production? Because traditional SDLC, as we know it, is very predictable. You write code, you test it, you ship it, you observe it, life's beautiful. But agentic AI breaks this model in some fundamental ways. Just this July, we saw how a coding agent deleted a production database during code freeze, and later it claimed that it had panicked, and so it ignored all instructions. There are reports which show that Gartner predicts about 40% of these projects getting scrapped by 2027. So these aren't just theoretical risks anymore. When you're shipping agentic experiences at scale, 3 questions matter all the more. Why are you building this? What is the underlying platform infrastructure that you're going to need? And how will you implement this for production? Starting from the business clarity, to the right orchestration platform, to the production safeguards that become table stakes for this modern world. And we're going to introduce this framework that I'm calling the 5 Cs. Yes, GenAI has boosted my own productivity, and I no longer think in 3s. Clarity in the why. We know context is queen, so context and coupling for the what, and control and confidence in the how. And for this, we have with us 3 amazing leaders who are living and breathing this transformation every single day. So please join me in welcoming Angie, Monica, and Kobe.
Hello.
How about we start off with introductions?
Yeah. I'm Angie Jones. I am Vice President of Engineering, focused on AI tools and enablement at Block. And yeah, I work on a lot of different AI tools, including our own open source agent named Goose. And then also working internally with the tools that our engineers use to develop products, but also to ship AI-enabled products.
Well, first of all, thank you, Smruti, for having us today, and glad to be here. This is my first, GraphQL Summit, which I'm attending and being a part of here. So I'm Monica Bajaj. I'm the Vice President of Engineering at Okta. Okta is a security and identity company. I hope many of you already know, and if you do not, then I think we have a problem. And I lead the authentication portfolio for our SIAM business, which is Consumer Identity Access Management business, which is the core business for SIAM. One of the big things which is top of mind for us is, like, as companies are building agentic applications, working in AI programs or projects, we are thinking about the security lens. And it is very, very important that with the agents, we used to talk about code assistants, now everybody's talking about agentic language. And it is really important to build that security layer right from the get-go, because if we do not, the consequences are pretty bad. So that's what I'm focusing on as well.
Beautiful. Yep. Welcome. Kobe.
And hi, everyone. My name is Koi. I'm a software engineer at Meta. My organization is called the Family of Apps Foundation. So what our team does is we basically provide the infrastructure support for all of the family of apps at Meta. So thinking Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and even some of the newer ones like Meta AI that some of you might heard. So for us, really, one of the challenges that we're trying to accelerate is because we have the family of apps and we want to kind of offer a similar or uniform AI experiences to all these different apps, how do we make sure we can build the things once and kind of deploy to all different applications? And how do we make sure that our users feel like the family of apps kind of behave in a similar way? So these are some of the interesting things that we're dealing with.
Beautiful. We got the right 3 perspectives on stage, so let's dive in. Angie, let's start with you.
Okay.
Every beautiful journey begins with the why. You've evolved Goose from something that started off as an internal abstraction layer for your internal developers to something that's now serving millions of Block merchants. So tell us a little about why you built Goose. What were some of the challenges that you saw in this journey from open source to something in production? And how has understanding the why shaped some of the technical decisions that you've made along the way that have now led you to the impact you're seeing?
Yeah, excellent questions. So one thing about Block, so for those who don't know, someone asked me earlier, what's Block? But Block is the parent company for Square, which I'm sure you've heard of, Cash App, Afterpay. So financial services company, but we have a really bold mission around economic empowerment. And two ways that we find that we're able to achieve that is with access and openness. And so when we looked at the generative AI movement and how this is being shaped by a small number of giant companies who are writing the rules for how we will engage with agentic software, we realized that, hey, we don't want to compete with them. That's not our game. But what we can do is open source some of the things that we're working on internally. So Goose is an agent that an IC created, just kind of tinkering around and wanted an agent very early days when LLMs were just able to make function calls and things like this. And so he began building this agent for our internal developers. And we used them internally and then decided to open source that. We were finding productivity gains, and it really shaped when we open sourced this, thinking about our values around openness, around access. What do we want this to look like for end users? And so Goose is highly extensible. It's LLM agnostic. Most of the companies that are making agents are also selling the models, right?
Yep.
And so it's very tightly coupled. But what does it look like to have an agent where you can use any models you want? We support 20 different LLM providers, hundreds of models, and it's fully open source, meaning anyone can fork this, they can create their own products with it, but more importantly, the community is able to contribute back to it. So they contribute the things that they want, and I find that Goose was actually, this is a fun fact, was the reference implementation for an MCP client. So we worked hand in hand with Anthropic as they were developing the MCP spec, and this was kind of the proof of concept that that spec was solid. And so while Goose may not be like the primary agent that folks are using, Goose definitely pushes the boundaries, sets the trends and the agenda. Most of the features you see in agents come through Goose first because the community contributes those features. This is what we want, and then the rest of the folks copy, But we love that. We want that. That's why we open sourced it, not to be the #1 agent, but to push the agenda and give the community a voice in what agentic AI should look like.
Beautiful. Monica, you help teams architect agentic systems, and security's got to be top of mind. So I'm curious, how has understanding the business purpose shaped the security posture, especially for things like API access strategy? And what are you seeing be fundamentally different in terms of enterprise needs for these agentic workloads?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is think about what is like the 3 things which you need to think about when you are building the agentic applications or agentic workloads are the purpose, the privilege, and the protection. Those are important. And when I talk about the purpose, it's very important to understand what is the purpose of the agent, what agent should be doing, and what agent should not be doing. That is very, very important because purpose is going to define the footprint of the permissions. Then the second part is the privilege. Basically, we are saying is the starting point should be agent should have the least privileged access, very granular level control. And if you remember when the agentic applications came in, it was all about like, hey, agents should do this. Now we are getting to a point where agents are very capability driven, right? We are having an agent to do a certain kind of a task, and even in that, you want to make sure how much they can do. They can do only read or they can do only write, right? I mean, so it has gone to very fine-grained access permissions. That's where, you know, the FGA part comes into play. And then the protection. When we talk about protection, it's all about having those guardrails. Auditability, observability is very important. The big difference what has happened, I mean, it sounds like, hey, what's new? We are already having these in our software. But the big difference is the traditional software has been always deterministic. This piece of software which we are building in this time frame is very non-deterministic, and the actions which it is taking is not reactive, it is very, very proactive actions. So while this is happening and dynamic decisions are happening in the flow, it is very important to have that auditability and observability at every single checkpoint, and the humans in the loop. Humans in the loop will never go away, by the way. More and more it is becoming important that humans in the loop have to do those checkpoints so that they can revoke actions as soon as agent is doing something not right. So that's very important. Now, I want to add a little bit more to it is like, there are 3 players right now in the whole software system. I mean, you heard in the keynote today, like all about APIs and API scale. Now we have APIs. APIs were always there. Humans were always there. Agents, right? So there are now 3 personas which are in the system, dealing with the scale, dealing with the security, dealing with the whole, you know, rate limiting. Like, so the system is very complex because everybody is talking to everybody else, right? So you got to think from that perspective and see how you can have purpose, privilege, and protection.
Beautiful. Yeah. Koe, there are very few companies that see the level of scale and performance constraints as you probably do at Meta. You've gone from having 2-second response times to dealing with 10+ minute context windows. You've also talked about how AI is a great tool for failing faster. So walk us through how you're grappling with the why and how we're using some of these tools in your journey from pilot to production.
Yeah, so what Smruti you just mentioned about how we traditionally, if you think about Meta's family of apps, the 2 seconds request is more like, okay, it's a request response, right? Someone's trying to load up newsfeed. We kind of expect the app to start within 2 seconds, and you can have that infinite scrolling experience, which means your API needs to be fast, constantly, historically, before the agentic era, engineers sometimes optimize 100 milliseconds of latency away just so that we deliver a better user experience. And this has changed significantly with the agentic workflow, where we saw that with all these reasoning models that the LLM can go for minutes or if like even 10 minutes, half an hour. So that means some of the assumptions that we previously have that allowed us to scale very, very fast is no longer valid. Now we need to deal with requests that's very long lasting. And we also, it's no longer a very viewing based. You're actually interacting with the agent a lot. It's like a term based. Yeah. So I think for us, there's a separate roles at Meta where you have an infrastructure team and you have product teams. So for infrastructure teams, and we think we have intentionally chose the approach where we probably don't know where the future is like, but we should pick a solution that is general enough. Like for example, today we're talking to like a user's talking to one agent. Maybe at some point we're going to have a chat where you're talking to several agents at once, or maybe you're going to have a group chat of multiple users and multiple agents. So what kind of solutions do we build our infrastructure upon so that we can scale into that more complicated scenario is a very intentional and infrastructure choice. We decided to lean into our messaging stack, which kind of already supports group chats today, and is already using some of the pub sub system instead of request-based. And I think this is also where, like Apollo customers, right? You have all these like good offerings of GraphQL subscriptions. So you can afford to make a better choice of, okay, I'm going to use a little bit more complicated solutions, but it will last me a little bit longer. So that's where I think this is where our infrastructure solutions decided to do. For the product side, I actually want to kind of point out some of the things in the keynote that we talked about. So there is shipping that agentic experience to your end users. There's also agentic workflows we as like developers, we internally embrace as kind of to allow you to ship products. And this is where we decided to lean to how do we allow that developer experience to get faster. So some of the things we experimented was, okay, can we generate code, right, from a Figma design? Can we like shorten the cycle from PMs to designers to engineers? Or when we're doing iterations on experiments, can we have AI in the loop so that like that iteration based on reading your user reactions can just start iterating that without human there? So I think one of the things you mentioned in the beginning is like, well, a lot of these agentic startups experience 70% of them fail. I'd be interested to see like how many non-agentic ones also fail, right? I would bet it's kind of around, maybe around the same number. But then the thing is, if you know you're gonna fail, it's much better if you fail within 6 months rather than fail with a year. And I think agentic workflows enable us to do that. Like if you know, like saving that 6 months is a win in a lot of companies.
Yep, that is true.
Time is the opportunity cost right there. So what I heard from all three of you is clarity is foundational. It is very important to know why you're building this. And the more tuned your agent is to a specific problem you're looking to solve and the use case, the tighter and the higher is the success rate for what you're building. It informs Angie's product decisions, Monica's security posture, and how you decide what permissions an agent gets, and what Kovei talked about in terms of infrastructure patterns, or even using some of this in the development lifecycle itself. So great. So we know why we're building this. Next comes the what. What is the technical architecture under the hood? Monica, you also talked about how agentic experiences need LLMs, and LLMs by nature have this inherent randomness and non-determinism. And the space is just evolving so rapidly. There's chock-a-block, vendors, tools, frameworks. So there's this inherent tension. There's this tension between building fast and building right. There's this tension between context accuracy, because context is queen, and yes, I said it, and security. So how do we grapple with all this tension in the house? And how do you build the right technical architecture that is crucial for autonomous, non-deterministic, dynamic agent development and execution? So let's dive into that section. Kovei, let's start with you. You've shared a very practical challenge. How do you decide what goes in an MCP tool versus a prompt versus the platform itself? So tell us about your rule of thumb.
Yeah, so I think this is something that I face on my everyday, like working as an engineer. I think there are a set of capabilities, for example, when LLM needs data, well, that has to be an MCP tool. But then there are other situations, it's not super clear. Do I put that in a prompt, or do I actually put that as an MCP tool? That's not very clear to us to begin with. And what we found is what engineers generally do is you start with that minimal set of MCP tools. Like sometimes I just reuse an existing GraphQL query that we need to power a browser or power an app. Off you go. Here is all of the data you technically should have. And maybe, okay, here is your ability to write some code if you need. And go figure out this problem. And you kind of do that iterative approach there. So you observe what the model is doing at each step. When you find that, okay, this response is too large, so the model is not picking up the right things. That's when I know, okay, I need to split this existing GraphQL-based MCP2 maybe into 2 queries. Or sometimes when I find the model is doing something I don't like, then I started writing more prompts. I started writing more and more, and it started becoming a book. And then this is where, like, okay, actually, maybe that should not be part of the prompt. That should be converted into code that would just like call the MCP. And so you guarantee to get back the data that the LLM can consume, and it will guide it towards the right direction. And this is actually, I want to share one of the things I found is super powerful with GraphQL is doing development. We tend to let the model sometimes construct that GraphQL query itself. And as many of you know, that GraphQL is very declarative. You have to specify everything until the leaf fields, right, whether I return that string or int. And it provides me some of the observability. I can kind of get into what the model is thinking or what exact data the model wants to get. And then sometimes I figure, oh, OK, this is the query the model is writing. But actually, you need this field as well. So I can actually go back and change in the prompt to nudge the model in that way, which I find is very, very powerful and very unique when you're working with a GraphQL-like API that is super declarative.
Koya, that resonates. We had a similar experience. Our prompt became a book. We started with, let's make GraphQL easy to onboard onto. And then pretty soon, we're like, wow, this is a long prompt. How do we make it further easier? Angie, you've orchestrated Goose. You also said how Goose interacts with hundreds of internal tools and vendors. So walk us through what this orchestration layer really looks like under the hood. And how has it helped you minimize this vendor volatility, right? Like what was true 3 months ago is no longer true. Things that worked a week ago don't work anymore. So how did you orchestrate Goose?
Yeah, I think even serving as this orchestration layer that's not coupled to one specific model, really stress tests agentic AI as a whole. So can I swap out my model? Can I go from a GPT model to a Claude model and everything still work in my flow, right? Yeah. So those are the sorts of things that we get to stress with Goose. But Goose basically plays, if we think about models and we think about end users, your agents like Goose play that middle ground. And when you think about that, okay, I'm working with a non-deterministic, stateless model. What should be protected in between this interaction? Yeah. And those are the things that your agent should then focus on, right? Whether that be security. So our security team is phenomenal. I keep them right here next to me so that we don't mess up. But they've introduced a lot of things that I hope to see, and I know I'll see in other agents soon enough. But things like detecting prompt injections, right? Not only are your models non-deterministic, you have malicious bad actors who are creating a lot of these tools that the models must use. And so discovering ways to detect like ill intent or things that will put the end user at risk, all of this is now the responsibility of agentic AI. So the orchestration between all of that, the models themselves, the tools that they need to use, whether that be MCP servers or not, the permissions, like even like giving your end users control over what can be done autonomously versus where I want to be the human in the loop. And I want you to prompt me for confirmation or additional information and things like that. And so I really look at this as your agent can't be non-deterministic in your model. That's just not going to work, right? And so someone has to be the grown-up in the room, and that needs to be the agent.
The agent. Okay, beautiful. And malicious actors, security. This is right up your alley, Malika. And you've shared how buy what is not core business principle with me. So I'm very curious, when we're thinking of building agentic experiences, and when you think about security infra for that, how does one decide what parts to build, what parts to buy, and how does one go about making those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, one basic, practice has been, or the basic principle is, like, if it is not your core business, just go buy it. That's the first thing. Because a lot of times people forget, like, it's not just as engineers, I mean, I'm one of them. is like, let's build it ourselves, right? We have a tendency to do that. But we forget the part of the managing that piece of software and keeping it up to date is very, very critical. It's much more critical than just building. So because building you do once, managing you do throughout the life cycle. And at some point, you just give up, right? So when I look at authentication, identity, these are commodity. That's a commodity. And it's very important that if you are not in that core business and it is needed for your software, just go and buy it. Now in that, there is a little bit of nuance. If you buy an identity solution, the IDP, let's say you buy Okta, on top of it, if you want to customize some of your agentic experience when it comes to identity, which is very much tailored to your business, you can build that one. But the foundation you have bought, right? Similarly, for authorization, as you might have seen, several years, we just talked about authentication. Nobody cared about authorization. But in this era, authorization is equally important, sometimes more important than authentication. So authorization and authentication both are the same important areas to focus on. So similarly, authorization solution, I will say go buy it, especially shameless plug, FGA, fine-grained authorization is one of it's an open source as well, OpenFGA we call it as, and it's a product for fine-grained access control, right, to the resource and user level. And it is very, very critical in the agentic experiences. So that's one. But again, going back, if you are building a policy engine for your agents, that's something you can build. Yeah. But you still have the authorization foundation. And the third one, as I mentioned earlier, was APIs, agents, humans, so much rate limiting factors will come into play. But rate limiting is a solved problem. There are API gateways. Now people are building MCP gateways because MCP is the new norm. You can buy that solution, right? So that's the approach. These are the three big things I think at a meta level in terms of when you build agentic experiences, what to think about.
Great. So we heard three complementary approaches. Kowe talked about how GraphQL provides this declarative orchestration layer, which really helps you tune your context. And yes, context is queen. Angie, you talked about how it's important to decouple your vendors, your LLMs, your models from that context. So not only do you minimize vendor volatility, but it also gives your teams a framework and a foundation to iterate rapidly and interconnect no matter how fast these other things are changing. And Monica, you talked about how it's important to shift left some of these security practices and bake that into the very foundation. And what's been very interesting to hear about three of you is you've all got different perspectives, Meta builds it all. Monica, you've talked about buying it. And Angie, you've talked about open sourcing. So they're three very different strategies. I'm curious, what are you seeing similar or dissimilar in what drives these?
I can get started. Actually, Monica, when you mentioned we as engineers loves to build it, and the cost that we commonly forget is the maintenance cost. That actually really, really resonated with me. I think we have a joke internally, which is everything is either under development or deprecated. We never have a state which is this is a satisfied build product. Maybe we'll just keep it for a year. No, it never.
And never gets deprecated, by the way.
That's true. We mark it with @deprecated, but it stays in our schema for forever. And so you just keep on maintaining it. There's always that 1% of traffic. You don't know where it comes from, but it costs your API.
It's like my life philosophy, work in progress till I'm dead.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So I think some of these definitely resonated with us. A lot of times it's about your understanding your product offering and what specific challenges that you're dealing with. I think when Meta made that decision is really about scales. What we find is there is very little offerings that is outside there that handles like hundreds of billions requests like that like we do. And so when you have the entire stack from the bottom up are kind of like built in-house to address that very specific and unique problems, it started to make sense like every step of the way. The other thing that we found is because a lot of our apps represent the social graph, right? Like so the security, the privacy gets really, needs to be really fine-tuned, right? So in the past, like maybe 10 years ago, we have a situation where it's like somehow someone can figure out if you block them or not. These are things that it's not traditionally security, but it's kind of important in the context of the social app. So because of these like demands, so what I would say is like also have a good understanding of what you're building, what you're selling. Know what is special for you and what can be reused, and then you can make that judgment call.
I mean, you said a good point here because like the way when I was talking about the purpose, right? What we are trying to solve, you are trying to solve about the scale problem, but you know, if you ask me, I'm trying to solve how to make all of this secure, right? I mean, that is the purpose I have. And whether it is MCP, whether it is non-MCP or just, you know, standard agent, I want to make sure that I have that layer and I make sure that people who are building, they can trust Okta or Auth0, like, I mean, Auth0 is a part of Okta. So they can feel very secure that whatever I'm building, but this company is ready to take care of.
It's got your back.
Right?
That's right.
So don't worry about it.
Yep.
And we have to do it at scale also because agents, like the whole agent orchestration is massive.
Yeah.
So we also want to be transparent how we are doing it. Just by saying that, hey, we'll take care of it doesn't work, right? We have to have transparency. That's where the whole explainability, auditability. So if the customer wants to look at like, hey, how my agents are sprawling or how my agents are taking actions, we should have those mechanisms in place for them so that they can look at like exactly like what is happening behind the scenes. So that's important. Plus, if you look at the sessions, you know, a lot of times agents are running like, you know, depending upon like you talked about Block, like, you know, financial transactions. They are like, you know, financial grade identity is like a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And agents have to be financially grade identified, like certified in order to take those actions. Imagine if we have that world where, you know, these agents are like, yeah, these agents are really well tested, you know, stress tested across the board, and they can do the needed action within those boundaries. That would be great.
Great. And that's a great segue to the third section, which is the how. We know why we're building this. We know what's the technical architecture. Now, how do you ship this in production with the right trade-offs and safeguards for security, for performance, for reliability, for accuracy? And what are the right control and confidence measures that we got to bake right into the design? Let's start with you, Angie. You've talked about how agents need to be observable, governable, and audit trails. And Monica, you talked about the same. And this really resonates because if you think about it, every era has had its receipts. The PC had its progress bar, the web had its request count and query time, mobile had its refresh spinner. So what does showing your work really, really look like in this modern world, and how do you implement that at block scale?
Yeah. So what was great about us creating Goose, again, this was just a developer that created this, wasn't a product play. And like most companies, we were kind of thinking like, okay, AI is here, what is our product play? What are we gonna do? And we were really adamant about, we don't wanna just make something just to make something, right? You want to make something, like you've mentioned, Monica, that this is your domain. You're really good at this, you know this inside and out, and then you build something that your customers would use for that. But by us just happening to have Goose, we learned a lot. Our entire company uses it. It's used by multiple companies, including Apollo, and it's open source. So we saw a lot and learned a lot about what it means to use agentic AI in production, right? And we were able to fortunately take those lessons as well and incorporate them as we began to build out our AI products. And so some of the lessons that we've learned, and when you talk about receipts, you ask your agent something, it goes off, it does who knows what, right? And then comes back with a response. And sometimes it's that, yep, done everything, it's great, and it's not, right? It wasn't done, or even drop in the database, that story that we heard earlier, and then it kind of panicked, and then, oh, I don't know, I can't recover, we're all in trouble. So you need to be able to understand what happened on that journey. And so we've integrated a lot of kind of points of observability and being able to audit. And some of the key ones are, what did the user ask, right? But then how did the agent or the model, how did the model reason about that? I want to track the thought process, right? And then what tools did it invoke, right? And then what was the outcome of that? So all of that needs to be logged so that you can observe, you can learn from it, you can improve the agent, you know how to even improve your flow. So we talked about long prompts versus tools and things like that, right? I think tools are where you get that deterministic nature. So if it's something you don't want to leave up to chance, probably should go in the tool. So those are the types of lessons we learn by observing how people interact with agents, how agents interact with models, and how this basically, what's the flow in the journey that they take to get a task done.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
I
mean, it totally makes sense, because if you look at the way it happens is, like you mentioned, like humans give instructions to agents that go and do this for me, right? And at some point, humans are authenticating these agents. So they have to go through authentication process. But one thing is very important, that every agent should be tied with some human ID, so that in case if agent does something wrong, we know who is accountable, right?
Yeah, tell me a little about that. Like you've said, when you think about agent identity, you've got human at the core, agent at the edge, and you've got this trust as the binding glue.
Correct.
How do you actually implement that for long-running sessions? And more importantly, when something goes wrong, as we all know it often does, who's really held legally accountable? How do you think about that?
So you going back to the statement which you made, like, agents at the edge, humans at the core, and trust is the binding glue. It's the zero trust. So one big difference is
trust no one.
One big difference until now is, like, we talked about zero trust in the beginning, but in agentic world, zero trust is throughout the journey of the agent. You cannot trust at any point in time, because the trust is dynamically changing, means you have to constantly re-evaluate at every step. You mentioned about the agent taking, auditability part, but what actions agents are taking is really important. So that's very important. Now, in terms of accountability, you mentioned, before that, like long-running sessions, the way I look at it is, like, you also want to make sure that when the long-running sessions are happening, the experience for the user is not changing. The developer experience or the agentic experience, we call it, is not, it's not having a lot of latency. Otherwise, the purpose is gone. Lost. So how do you do this? You basically have these tokens, which are like the way of authenticating, the refresh tokens, the access tokens. You put in a vault. Right? We call it as a token vault, which is one of the offerings. In that, like in token vault, these are secure. So whenever agents, these long-running sessions are chopped in between, so that we don't have like long-running credentials across the board. So the agent can go back to the token vault, ask, because there is some identification already done, it swaps and basically gets those refresh token and do its business, come back, do its business, come. So you are basically not having these sessions long running, and there's a chance of, like, prompt injection or any other malicious attack can happen. So that's one way to do it. Now, in terms of accountability, the way I look at it is enterprise and the agent, right? And the human. These are like the three players in this. So if there is any flaw in the space of, like, let's say if agent is trying to do some action and it does something wrong and some security gap is there, who do you blame? I would blame the enterprise. If I'm a customer, I would say like, hey, you are at fault, your security is not correct, right? So that the accountability goes. The second part is if agent does hallucination, which agents do, right? So who is responsible? At this point, I will again blame the enterprise because that means your prompts, like, you know, the whole prompting which you have built, the context which you have built is not fully accurate. The third part is, let's say if agent is doing an action and based on what human told, and human tricked the agent, right? At this point, I will blame the human. Because that's why I was going back, agents have to be tied with humans so that in the observability, when you go and look at the observability of the agent persona, you should be able to see like, okay, this agent is tied with this human. You know, so that builds that assurance, and agents are not like some ghosts, like, you know, kind of thing. So it's very important. Yeah, so you need that tracing.
Okay,
yeah.
Lovely. And Kaveh, you've talked about the security trifecta, and that really resonated, how you can get only 2 out of the 3. But tell us, with this agentic world, how do you put some of that in production at scale?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, like the security trifecta is like the cap theorem is for distributed system. The security trifecta is like the cap theorem, but for security. It basically says like, if you want your application to be absolutely safe, you can do 2 out of these 3 things. 1, you don't perform mutations. 2, you don't consume user identifiable data. And 3, you always like, you don't work with like untrustworthy people. And to a lot of the shipped agentic experiences, we have to deal with those 3. We want the agent to do something, so they have to be able to do mutations. You're dealing with end users. You don't know who they are. They might not be trustworthy. And you do have to access user, like those sensitive data. Like for example, like a given user account, I need to know who you are to do something on your behalf. So we've really just like leaned in towards what Angie mentioned about like monitoring, observability, like, okay, if that's what we have to ship, let's make sure that we have that traced through our entire system, and to be able to like, okay, offline, let's figure these things out as soon as we can, like before like it affected most of the users or things like that. I also do want to mention for agentic development, I think historically, like there's a very clear right or wrong answer. Like, okay, this API has some problem. That's why I'm have my screen not loading problem, or this like user action didn't go through problem. But for agentic experiences, a lot of times we found is like this answer is not quite as good as my previous launch. But I don't know what's going. It's not like failing. It still produced an article for me, and it's just not quite there. So I think we as an industry need to shift towards like leaning towards user feedback, like maybe instead of treating your request reliability, those logs as your like first line of defense, shifting more and more to that user feedback, bake that user feedback into your agentic flow. Can you at some point like kind of prompt users to give you more feedback? How do you like it so far? Like even just simple ones, love it, don't love it, it's better than the last version, or things like that, right? Just like start collecting a lot of that so that we can get a better sense of what's going on.
Okay, awesome. Let's do a last round of rapid fire. One piece of advice for our audience who's accelerating journey from pilots to production. Kaveh, Monica, Angie.
Start simple. I know we all have very grand dreams, and we as an engineer love to over-architecture everything, but in this world of non-determinism, and you absolutely have no idea what the model is going to do, start with the absolute simplest thing possible, validate, expand from there is what I would say.
Start simple. Love it.
Stay secure.
Stay secure. Love it again. Can't deny that. Angie, how about you?
I would say you need to build with AI to build AI so that you yourself understand what are the risks, where does it fall down, and how it feels to be an end user of this technology.
Love it. Build with AI, build it yourself. All right, everyone. Big thanks to Kaveh, Monica, and Angie. My big takeaways for this panel: apply a systems thinking lens. The fundamentals are all the more important in this world: security, reliability, resiliency, context accuracy. And apply this framework of the 5 C's. Start with clarity. The more tuned your agent is to the problem or the use case you're looking to solve, the higher is going to be your business impact. For the what, focus on context and coupling. So choose your architecture and your abstractions very wisely. GraphQL provides you a declarative orchestration platform. Decouple your vendors and your LLMs from your context so you can minimize vendor volatility, and shift left security right into the design. And last but not the least, layer your safeguards so you can ship with the right controls and confidence baked into your very design. And this will help you build right, build what is robust, and build what is responsible for very high business impact. And with that, live long and prosper.